This is AIM Agenda. Thanks for your company. With me now from Hobart, the Greens Leader Christine Milne. Christine Milne, I want to ask you about the Foreign Minister's comments about ISIL, saying that destroying the group altogether might be impossible. What are your thoughts on that assessment?
Well, I'm glad that the government has pulled back from the gung-ho talk they had last week, where the Prime Minister was saying it's a death cult, we're going in to destroy them. I mean, President Obama made it fairly clear that they wouldn't be destroyed because they are an ideological they're an ideological movement, if you like. Now, Julie Bishop, having been to NATO, recognises that. And what the point here is, well, what is our government saying? What would success look like in the strategy that they think that they are engaged in? Because it's pretty clear to me now Australia doesn't have a strategy. We'll just wait to see what the US tells us to do, and that is not good enough for Australia.
Do you disagree with the Prime Minister's characterisation of this group as a death cult?
Oh, there's no doubt this group is appalling. The barbarity of what they're doing is shocking, and obviously everything has to be done to strengthen the Iraqi government and end, as much as you can, the expansion of ISIS. But the point here is you've got Syria involved, and does Tony Abbott seriously say that we are going to be fighting on the same side as the Assad regime and legitimising them? What we need to do now is build the new Iraqi government as a unity government, try to get moderate Sunnis, try to get the Kurds to have some support for the new government. This requires a lot of diplomatic effort. It also requires stopping the money flowing into ISIS in arming them. It requires talking to the Turkish government about sealing the border. I think people need to be a lot more considered, because this will be, if it continues the way it's going, it will be a multi-year new war in Iraq. And Australia needs to have its Prime Minister tell us what the strategy is.
I want to ask you about this story. It's the front page of the Daily Telegraph this morning. It's a related story, but one closer to home. A suggestion that the Islamic State flag was auctioned before a packed mosque in Sydney. Does that worry you that might be the case? That story this morning in Sydney southwest.
Well, if it was true, it would certainly be a shocking thing that that's happening in Australia. We already know that some young Australians have gone to fight with ISIS, and of course we condemn that. We don't want to see any young Australians being attracted to go and fight in such an appalling way, in which they're just killing people outright, summary executions, beheadings and the like. But again, this issue here is, are you going to inflame jihadism by having a Western alliance led by the United States rushing into Iraq and bombing raids in Syria and Iraq, and whether or not it is even legal? Now, quite clearly, ISIS is determined to goad the United States into a war in Iraq, and that will inflame those jihadist tendencies, and that's what it would really, really distress me to know, that that was already happening in Australia if that story was true.
Let's move on now to 1 year on of the Abbott government. It's fair to say that the Prime Minister has had a number of significant wins, and of course all governments have some hiccups in their first year. But if you look at the headline promises, repealing the carbon and mining taxes, he's done both of those, and in terms of the boat arrivals, they've stopped. So for 12 months, that's quite a record of achievement, isn't it?
Well, it's an appalling record, actually. On their first year, we now have the Human Rights Council coming out condemning Australia for its acts against asylum seekers. We've got a death in custody. I mean, this government is responsible and has to take responsibility for that. You've got the murder of Reza Barati, for example. On the environment, you've got appalling outcomes with greater expansion of coal seam gas, coal mines, trying to hand back environmental powers to the states. In terms of the attack on the vulnerable, you've got this terrible budget, which people are still marching about around Australia because it makes life harder for people. And Tony Abbott has crashed or crashed through. That's all you can say about it. He crashed through on abandoning the mining tax and abolishing carbon pricing because he got the support of a coal magnate to do it. That is not in the best interests of the country.
You obviously have your criticisms of the policies, but they were a reality before they began their time in office. If you look at commitments made and those that have been delivered, he has been true to his word, hasn't he, when it comes to those overarching promises of mining, carbon tax and stopping the boats.
And he's done it with a mining magnate, and it was always the case as soon as Clive Palmer had balance of power that he would support the abolition of the mining tax and the carbon price. But the role of a government is to act in the best interests of the country. And what are the costs to the nation associated with Tony Abbott crashing through in this way? They are more extreme weather events. Life's harder for people. People are worried, the unemployed, they're sick. We now have 8.4 million workers with their superannuation guarantee frozen, and we've got Australia receiving international condemnation because of its appalling treatment of asylum seekers. Where does that leave us as a nation?
I want to ask you one final question relating to the talks between the Foreign Minister and her Chinese counterpart. He rebuked her last year for her intervention over a dispute in the East China Sea. Yesterday in Sydney, said that China could be Australia's most sincere friend, if not its best friend in Asia. What do you make of that?
It was really having a go at the Australian government because Tony Abbott had said that Japan is Australia's best friend in the region. That was an extremely foolish thing for the Prime Minister to say, because in diplomatic circles in the region you have many friends, you never have a best friend. And that was clearly a rebuke from the Chinese, but also a reminder that Australia and China can have a constructive relationship, and that's something that for my own part, I'm very keen to see China have Hobart as its Antarctic base, for example. That would be a great thing for research, for tourism, for the university. So there are many constructive relationships, but if you look at the world stage, Tony Abbott's foreign policy record is not great. He cozied up to Stephen Harper on climate denialism. He's appeasing the Sri Lankan government when they are rejecting the United Nations Human Rights Council investigating war crimes. He had Indonesia offside, and it's taken a very long time to get that back on track. And so up to date, he has caused a lot of problems for Australia around the world.
Christine Milne, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kieran.